Welcome. I hope you had a good weekend. Today we're beginning with chapter 14. So in 14 we're talking about the nervous system, which is responsible for receiving sensory information from both the external and internal environments, processing, integrating the information, and generating motor output. The nervous system has two major divisions: the central nervous system, or CNS, consisting of the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, the PNS, which consists of the nerves. Now, nervous tissue contains neurons that conduct impulses and neuroglia that support and nourish the neurons. And we have several types of neuroglia in the CNS. Each has a specific function, such as the microglia are phagocytic cells. Astrocytes provide metabolic and structural support, and oligodendrocytes form the myelin sheath. What does a neuron look like? What is its anatomy? Neurons are composed of cell body, and in that cell body you have the nucleus and organelles. Dendrites are short extensions that receive signals from sensory receptors. And an axon is a long extension that conducts nerve impulses. Long axons are covered by what we call a myelin sheath. Individual axons we call nerve fibers, and collectively, when they're all together, they form a nerve. There are three types of neurons. You have sensory neurons, interneurons, and motor neurons. Sensory neurons take information from sensory receptors to the central nervous system. Interneurons occur within the CNS, and motor neurons take information from the CNS to effectors such as muscles or glands, which carry out those responses. The myelin sheath is the protective covering of an axon. It's formed by neuroglia cells called Schwann cells. The gaps where there are no myelin sheath are called the nodes of Ranvier. A myelin sheath gives nerve fibers their white, glistening appearance and plays an important part in the nerve regeneration within the PNS itself. Multiple sclerosis is a disease in which the myelin sheath breaks down. So the myelin sheath gives a lot of good protection to the nerve. The synapse is the transmission of the nerve impulse from one neuron to another, and it takes place at the synapse when a neurotransmitter molecule gets released from the axon bulb into a synaptic cleft. The binding of the neurotransmitter to receptors in the postsynaptic membrane causes either excitation or inhibition. And once the transmitter has been released into that synaptic cleft and it's initiated a response, it's removed from the cleft by enzymes. Now, we have two well-known neurotransmitters. One is acetylcholine, or ACH, and the other norepinephrine, or NE. But at least 100 different substances are known, or at least is suspected to be neurotransmitters. Many of the drugs work by interfering with the action of the neurotransmitters, and others act by prolonging neurotransmitters. Now let's get back to the nervous system. Let's look at the central nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the spinal cord, the brain. These are both protected by bone, meninges, and cerebrospinal fluid. The CNS receives and integrates sensory input and formulates motor output. The CNS also is composed of short, non-myelinated gray matter and myelinated tracts called white matter. The ventricles of the brain is where the cerebrospinal fluid is stored. The the spinal cord extends from the base of the brain to the vertebral canal. Its structure has a central canal, gray matter, and white matter. Individual vertebrae protect the spinal cord, and the spinal cord nerves project from the cord through small openings called intervertebral foramina. Fibrocartilage, intervertebral discs separate the vertebrae. The central canal of the spinal cord contains cerebrospinal fluid that protects the spinal cord. The gray matter is centrally located and shaped like the letter H, where portions of sensory neurons and motor neurons are found. Interneurons communicate with these two types of neurons. The white matter of the spinal cord occurs in areas around the gray matter. So what are the functions of the spinal cord? It provides a means of communication from the brain and peripheral nerves that leave the cord. The brain coordinates the voluntary control of the limbs. Motor signals originating in the brain pass down descending tracts to the spinal cord and out to our muscles by way of what is called motor fibers. When the spinal cord is severed, there's a loss of sensation and motor control. If the spinal cord is severed at the thoracic area, we have what's called paraplasia. If it's at the neck region, it's called quadriplasia. So at the neck, it would just totally stop movement of all four limbs, and you wouldn't have any feeling. Now, the brain is composed of the cerebrum, the diencephalon, the cerebellum, and the brainstem, which contains ventricles. The cerebrum is the largest portion of the brain and it's the center that receives sensory input. It carries out integration before commanding voluntary motor responses, such as me lifting my hand. It communicates with the coordinations of the other parts of the brain. The hemispheres, or cerebral hemispheres, they cover sensation, reasoning, learning, memory and language, and speech. These all take place in the cerebrum. It's divided into left and right cerebral hemispheres. We have the cerebral cortex, that is a thin but highly convoluted outer layer of gray matter covering the cerebral hemispheres. It's the region of the brain that accounts for sensation, voluntary movement, and all of the processes we associate with consciousness. You have primary motor and sensory areas of the cortex. So we have the motor areas, sensory areas, and we also have what's called association areas. The primary motor area is the frontal lobe. Voluntary commands to the skeletal muscles begin here. The primary somatosensory is located just prior or posterior to the central sulcus in the parietal lobe. Sensory information from the skin and skeletal muscles arrive here. Reception areas for other primary sensations like taste, vision, hearing, and smell are in other areas of the cerebral cortex. Association areas are places where integration occurs and where memories are stored. Then we have the diencephalon. The diencephalon is composed of the hypothalamus and thalamus. And this is where the region encircles the third ventricle. The hypothalamus is an integrating center that helps maintain homeostasis and controls the pituitary gland. It serves as a link between the nervous and the endocrine systems. The thalamus receives all sensory input except the sense of smell, vision, auditory, and somatosensory information arriving at the thalamus from the cranial nerves and the tracts from the spinal cord. The thalamus is involved in arousal of the cerebrum, and it participates in higher mental functions such as memory and emotions. The pineal gland secretes the hormone melatonin, and it's located in the diencephalon. And as most of you know, melatonin helps us go to sleep. I take it at night myself to help me go to sleep. Excuse me. The cerebellum is separated from the brainstem by the fourth ventricle. It receives sensory input from the eyes, from the ears, the joints, muscles, about the present position of body parts, how we're standing, where the foot is, and so on. It also receives motor output from the cerebral cortex about where these parts should be located. After integrating all this information, it sends motor signals by way of the brainstem to the skeletal muscles. The cerebellum maintains posture and balance. It ensures that all the muscles work together to produce smooth, coordinated, voluntary movements. The cerebellum assists in the learning of new motor skills. Then we have the brainstem, which contains the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. The midbrain relays impulses from the cerebrum to the spinal cord or cerebellum and houses the reflexes for vision, auditory, and tactile responses. The medulla oblongata and pons have reflex centers for vital functions, such as breathing and our heartbeat. The limbic system integrates our emotions, such as fear, joy, sadness, and higher mental functions, such as reasoning and memory. It's a functional grouping rather than what we would call an anatomical one. And it's found in the deep structures within the cerebrum. The limbic system blends primitive emotions and higher mental functions into a united whole, and it accounts for why activities such as sexual behavior and eating seem pleasurable. It translates unpleasant sensations or emotions such as pain, frustration, hatred, despair into a stress response. It's composed of the amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala can cause experiences to have emotional overtones, and it creates the sensation of fear. If necessary, the amygdala can trigger the fight or flight reaction. The hippocampus is believed to play a crucial role in learning and memory. And as we get older, we know that memory is something that quite often decreases. So memory is the ability to hold a thought in your mind or to recall events from the past. Learning takes place when we retain and use those memories. What types of memories do we have? We have short-term memory, which ends up as long-term memory. Long-term memory is a mixture of what is called semantic memory, like numbers and words, and episodic memory, such as people or events that we've been to. Skill memory is another type of memory that can exist independent of the episodic memory. Skill memory is involved in performing motor activities, such as many of you who like medical assistants who will be learning to give injections, will be learning to draw blood. This would be a skill memory. When you first learn a skill, more areas of the cerebral cortex are involved until it's perfected. Then the actions become automatic. You just automatically are able to do it. Skill memory involves all the motor areas of the cerebrum below the level of consciousness. We have long-term memories. These are stored in bits and pieces throughout our whole sensory association areas. The hippocampus serves as a bridge between these sensory association areas, where the memories are stored, and the prefrontal area, where memories are used. The prefrontal area communicates with the hippocampus when memories are stored and when these memories are brought to mind. So we also have what's called long-term potentiation. So on a cellular level, long-term potentiation is the release of more neurotransmitters than before due to continued stimulation over a short period of time, and it seems to be required for long-term memory. We also have the areas for language and speech. This depends on synaptic memory. Language and speech are dependent on the motor speech area or Broca's area and the Wernicke area, which is a speech sensory area. Then we have the peripheral nervous system, which contains only the nerves. These are bundles of axons, and the ganglia, which are cell bodies. There are cranial nerves and spinal nerves. We have 12 pairs of cranial nerves that are concerned with the head, neck, and face regions of the body. The vagus nerve branches to most of the internal organs. It is the longest. The 31 pairs of spinal nerves are also called mixed nerves because they contain both sensory and motor. Each one of those nerves serves the region of the body in which it's found. I hope you've enjoyed Chapter 14. There's a lot more to be gleaned from reading the chapter and looking at your PowerPoint slides. Do that and get your work done for the week, and I will be making another video for you for Chapter 15, and have a good day. Thank you very much.